My name's John Mendoza. I'm a former member of the Nuestra Familia prison gang. I was a Category 3, and I was a regimental commander in different parts of Northern California. And this is how crime works. I've been to San Quentin, Pelican Bay. In the early 90s, they put us out there with Southern Mexicans, and the Aryan Brotherhood, the Nazi lowriders, those were our enemies. They were putting us out there on the yard together, and we were going out there fighting. If you were crafty enough to bring a weapon out, we'll try to kill each other. I went to prison in 1988 when I was 18 years old. Some of my older homeboys that were there in the county jail with me basically told me that, when I get to San Quentin, that the NR is gonna approach me about making a commitment. I knew who to look for. The first time I went out to the recreation yard, there was a group of individuals that were in the corner that were covered with tattoos. Those were the NR members. From that point on, they put me on a 90-day probationary period. It's like you're functioning within that movement, but you're not an actual member. You can do anything that they ask you to do. Stabbing somebody, keeping security on somebody, holding paperwork, holding a weapon. A lot of guys that make a commitment because they want the status, they want the title, those guys are gonna end up getting weeded out because they're not making the commitment for the right reasons. They're not true believers. I was an NR member for about 5 years, 6 years. People take notice when you're functioning that long and you're not questioning authority, you're developing into a leader. Eventually the NF is gonna approach you because the NR in essence is like the NF's training grounds. I think it was 1994, I was approached by 2 high-ranking NF members, Smiley from Salinas and Mike Eel from Salinas. Induction process is similar to the NR. You go through an indoctrination process where you learn some of their concepts, their bylaws. You have a sponsor and you have the guy that actually pulls you. They're responsible for you. When you make a commitment to the NF, it's a lifetime commitment. I was asked things like, are you willing to kill your own flesh and blood? Are you willing to put the organization first before everything else in your life? Everything else that you were loyal to becomes secondary. They write everything down. There's 14 bonds, which is, I used to call it like my little toolbox. Everything that I needed to know how to function within that movement. Conduct, discipline. You're encouraged to study things like Middle Eastern philosophy, Socrates, revolutionary literature like George Jackson, Che Guevara. And then there's everything that you need to know about how to make weapons. I can make a stabbing instrument out of 15 pieces of paper. It's all about how you roll it and then how you put the point on. When your membership is sanctioned, there's no big ceremony. They'll get together with you, maybe in a group setting out there on the yard. They'll say something like, today, we're welcoming the brother boxer in. Me, I was right there in San Quentin on the yard, and it was done similar. Hey, this brother's a carnal now. He's a familiano from this point on. He's a member of the mob. It's like I felt like I reached a pinnacle, a point in my career where I had really accomplished something. Everything that I've done, it was all worth it. When a new arrival will come in, we'll get his information, we'll get all his vitals, we'll get his name, his CDC number, we'll get a little bit about his history, we'll get things like his AKA, his age, his neighborhood, what they called him. We'll look on the BNL to make sure he's not on the BNL. So the BNL, the bad news list, is we keep a roster of everybody that's coming in and out of that household. I'll send a filter out to all the members that are in that household, and I'll ask everybody, have you done time with this individual? This guy just drove up, do you know him? Any good or bad information? That'll get filtered out. If nothing comes back, he'll be welcomed into the household. Then at that point, he'll be given a care package, soap, shampoo, coffee, toothpaste, things like that. When you first come in to an ad seg or even a mainline, they give you what's called a 114 lockup order. That's like your passport. The gangs, they're gonna ask you for that. But the only way you're gonna get a lockup order is if they freely give it up. That's the only way we're gonna get it. It's gonna say on that lockup order, whatever gang that you're affiliated with, it's gonna say things like if you got an S on your jacket, like a sex offense or something, it's gonna say it right there. So somebody like that, you got an S, they probably wouldn't even give up their 114 lockup order because they already know what time it is. The NF is built, it's constructed or built under a paramilitary structure. A lot of the old NF members came from the Marines, they're ex-Marines, so they actually took a lot of the structure of the leadership in the military and brought it to the NF. You have like captains, lieutenants, commanders. A category 1 or for members that are just coming into the organization. They have no status over anybody else. Then you have a Cat 2. They've shown that they have leadership potential and they can give a correct interpretation of the Constitution. They'll become teachers for the Cat 1s. Now, in order to become a Cat 3, this is the cream of the crop. You need to be voted in. Then you have the inner council and the general council that basically make the decisions for the entire organization. You have a general for the prisons, you have a general for the streets, and then you have a general it's basically like internal affairs. He handles investigations, internal disputes, things like that. When you're in the SHU, you might be in charge of like 200 guys. You're not really running the whole prison. There's guys out there on the main line, regimental commanders out there that are doing that. But on the streets, if you're a regimental commander out there, it might be 20 or 30 guys. I was a regimental commander all over Northern California at different parts. Each time, there was probably around 10 to 20 members that were under me at that time. A day for me, well, it depends. Like San Quentin, you're running H unit in North Block, West Block. I would have to sit there and answer some investigations. So you're getting daily filters or weekly filters from all these different blocks. All day long, I would just be getting inundated with kites. San Quentin is the worst place to be as far as being a leader. The main rivals for the NF are the Mexican Mafia. They're following the Sureños. And then you have the Aryan Brotherhood, and they're following the whites. Out on the main line, it's mixed. Everybody's mixed out there. The Norteños, the Sureños, the blacks, everybody's mixed. If you're talking about in an ADSEG type of environment, a SHU program, everybody's kind of segregated. I spent all the 90s in the SHU program. When you see us out there on the yards and we're doing burpees and we're doing exercises out there, we're not out there doing that because we're just trying to get karate bodies and just trying to look nice, right? We're training for a war. That's what it is. They're getting ready to go to the SHU programs. They're gonna be engaged in a conflict. So the SHU program is like a prison inside of a prison. They put you in a cell and you stay in the cell about 23 hours a day. You'll come out of the cell, for a half hour to take a shower, and then you might come out for yard. And you come out to a yard you got 4 concrete walls and a camera. That's all that's out there. You got plexiglass on the top. If you see a bird fly over, you're like, damn, I seen a bird today, man. You go back in there and tell people in the pod. In the SHU program, they got what's called a nerve system. Everything is electric up there in Pelican Bay. They sit up there and they push buttons all day. You got one cop up there that's in charge of 6 different pods. So he might forget somebody's in the shower, or he might forget that a door is open, and he'll press another button and somebody else will come out. You could be in there watching TV or working out 1 minute, and you be out on the tier in a fight for your life the next minute. It'll happen just that fast. So us as Norteños, all day our mattresses would be rolled up and we'd be sitting by the door. I get up and I work out, I watch my TV, but for the most part, whenever there was movement or activity on the tier, I would be posted up on my door ready just in case my door would open. Because a lot of times the COs would say it was a mistake, but it wasn't a mistake. They popped certain doors open for different reasons. I used to see them. I used to watch from my cell. There's a lot of different places out there on the yards to bury weapons. Inside the buildings, up on like in the little rafters, we obviously know where they're at, under sinks or in the walls, buried. They keister it, to move a weapon from one place to another, they'll put it in their anal cavity is how it's moved around. I don't know how you want to put that out there, but so I went through Corcoran SHU wars back in the early 90s. We were going at it with the Mexican Mafia and the Aryan Brotherhood. They knew we were mortal enemies, that we would kill each other if we had a chance. but they would put us out on the yard. And they knew, the administration knew over there, you'd have to have your light on, and that meant that you wanted to go to yard. Guys used to turn their lights off because they didn't want no part of it. But those of us that remained active, we turn our lights on and we go out. It's like a little enclosure before you get out to the yard. And the yard's like a little, it's kind of shaped like a piece of pie. When you get in that little enclosure, you can see through the yard door who you're gonna go out there and get off with. So we go out, we fight. Always try to get yourself situated so that they have their back to the gunner, so that you can see what the gunner's doing. Because we were the ones that were getting targeted. It was the Northerners and the blacks that were getting shot and killed over there. There's no warning shots per se, but what they have is they have like it's called a Bertha or a knee knocker. It's like a gas gun that fires little wooden blocks. Sometimes they'll fire once, twice, and then they'll grab the real gun. But yeah, they don't give warning shots. Now the other thing though too is the COs are making bets. They would be like, hey, we got money on you guys, man. You guys better go out there and do your thing, man. You know, sometimes they would take their best fighters from one building and they would take the best fighter from another building and get them out there. When I first came in the system, I was young. I used to mean mug them. I used to have a bad taste, you know, for certain individuals. And I didn't even know why I hated them. It was because I was supposed to. That's the mindset that was instilled within me. But being around them, a lot of them were just like us. They were solid dudes. If there's a Sureño and he needs some toothpaste, or I got a book and he wants to read it, you know, we'll pass literature back and forth to each other. We can play chess on the tier. It doesn't do us any good to make that environment any more stressful than what it is. Now, like I said, if the gates open, we were directed to basically torpedo out and engage with whoever was on the tier. If we were gonna take off on staff, the guards, our politics might get set aside for a bigger purpose, to where, yeah, we might come together to go against the administration. You might see something like a small uprising within an ADSEG unit or something where we're not getting fed right. They're tearing up our cells and disrespecting, you know, personal possessions like pictures and things like that, where everybody says, you know what, we had enough. Let's just all board up, blocking your windows so that they can't see in there, which basically forces them to have to come in there and cell extract you. It's something that I was personally involved in before in Susanville. You know, when we were going through the Corcoran shoe wars, people might debate this, but a lot of the COs were split as far as who they favored in that war. Even some of the female officers, it's just you could tell that they were either sympathizing for the North or they were sympathizing for the South. A lot of it is geography, where that prison's at, whether or not they got family that are, you know, that might be hooked up. So it just depends. Corruption, it's rampant in the county jails. I mean, you see a lot of relationships that happen where female officers are getting into relationships with inmates. The next thing you know, they're bringing in drugs. They're not getting that kind of stuff into the visiting room. They're getting it through corrupt COs. In prison, one of the things that is a huge problem are the cell phones that are coming in. But it's a huge business for COs. They can make anywhere from $1,000 to $4,000 bringing in a phone, a cell phone. Having the phones it's a lot different because, again, when I was in the SHU program back in the 90s, when we be back there plotting somebody's murder, there was a lot of lag time that was involved. Either it had to go out through a letter, a coded letter, a phone call, or a visit. And, you know, you'd have to wait maybe a week or two for somebody to drive 300-400 miles to come see you up in Pelican Bay. But now you put these cell phones in the hands of these leaders. If somebody's got a green light on them, they'll make a phone call. You'll get a leader that will call a figurehead on the streets, and it will happen in real time. Hey, this dude's got a green light on him. He's got to go. It might happen that same night. Let's say somebody came on the tier, I was on the tier in the ADSEG or something, and he was like 6 cells down. I'd make verbal contact with him. I'd yell down there, hey, homie, that just came in. Hey, once you get situated, go ahead and make a line so that, you know, I can get at you. Making a line is where you take the elastic from your boxers or from the strands from your sheet. You'll make a line and you'll tie them together so that you can put a weight at the end of it, and then you'll throw it down the tier. It's just like a way to get back and forth to the cells. So he'll tie the kite on there and I'll pull it in and I'll read it and then I'll respond to it and he'll pull it back. Ingenuity. There's a lot of different ways to do things like that. Covert communications. There's a language that we use in there is called Nahua. It's an Aztec language and there's different dialects, but we use it so that if we're on a tier and we need to communicate and there's officers on the tier, we can talk on the tier in front of them and they're not gonna know what we say. There's very few people that know the whole language. They'll just know certain words like weapon, drugs, CO, hit, green light, things like that. Norteños, our color is red. Sureños, they wear blue. So the NF insignia, the sombrero, obviously it signifies the Mexican heritage. You got the dagger that signifies that this is a violent organization, and then each drop of blood characterizes its own individual meaning. So one drop of blood is for blood in, guys that have spilled blood coming into the organization, blood out, meaning anybody that tries to walk away from the organization, it's an automatic death sentence. And then the third drop of blood is for members that have honorably spilled blood that have died in the course of, their career. I had Nuestra Familia tattooed on the back of my head and I got that covered up. I had a star on my hairline when I had hair. That signified the NR. I had Familiano over my left eyebrow, being a family member in Spanish. And then I had a tattoo on the back of my forearm. I had an NF back there. The whole purpose of generating money is supposed to be for the less fortunate members, that are doing life in prison that don't have a means to take care of themselves. That's what it's supposed to be. It's a smokescreen, though. There's no trickle-down effect. There's a trickle-up effect. The money that comes in, it goes to the leadership, the select few at the top of the hierarchy. And they're the ones that use that money for their own expenses. Some of it's used to invest in drugs and to invest in new regiments or new territory that breaking NF ground out there on the streets. If I got a visitor that's willing to bring in drugs, off the top, my gang is gonna require whatever, 25% of it, 50% of it, or I might even have to turn it all over to them and they'll give me back what, they feel that they want to give me. You're part of that gang. You're going to take care of that gang or that criminal organization. The biggest thing in prison, county jails, the currency in there is soups. Everybody loves soups, top ramens. That's like a prison or jail currency right there. But obviously then you got weed, tobacco, then the hardcore drugs and things like that. White lightning, like a cup of that, it can go for like $50, but you're talking about like a cup of something that's like vodka. I learned early on from a young gang member that the more violent I was, the more blood that I spilled out there on the streets, the more respect I got. The fastest way to elevate yourself within the organization is by hurting people. So out on the streets, the structure, you have your regimental commander, second in command, your squad leaders, and then your manpower. I would have a second in command, and he would be my buffer. He would collect the money. He would make sure that everybody's following policy, issuing out the drugs, the guns that were coming in off the streets. That was to kind of keep me insulated. In the 90s, when it was a lot different, the regiments were called colonias. Back in those days, everything was compartmentalized. You had a robbery crew, another crew that would sell dope. You had a wrecking crew. I think the influence has waned over the years, like a lot. In the 80s and the 90s, you couldn't testify against the NF and live in the same county. You wouldn't even want to be in California. The threat was very real back in those days. But once the 3-strike law came into effect, we kind of stepped away from the violent crimes and started doing almost exclusively selling drugs. The influence is there, People know that they're out there. They're in the cuts. They're functioning. It's just not it's not like it was. I want to say since like 68 is when the NF first came into inception. From that time on, that's when they took a stand against the Mexican Mafia in South Block, San Quentin. This is basically when the NF banded together, decided that they weren't gonna be abused by the Mexican Mafia anymore. And from that point on, that's when the war started. So for almost the next 5 decades, that war was in effect. The truce actually started back in the SHU program in Pelican Bay, the end of hostilities, their agreement. Again, the whole purpose of it was for a lot of these guys that had been in the SHU program for some of them 3 decades, it was to get back out to the main lines and to basically show CDC that they could, live on the same yard without killing each other. So I thought it was a temporary thing. They were gonna get out there, somebody was gonna push a line somewhere, and it was gonna kick off, and then it was just gonna be a domino effect. But it's lasted. I mean, honestly, I never thought in my lifetime that I would ever see the day when norteños and sureños would be out there on the same yards, playing basketball with each other, walking laps with each other. But at the same time, there was a lot of house cleaning. Guys that had issues, internal issues within their respective gang were getting dealt with. Whether it was over misconduct, something came up in their past or something like that, there was a lot of house cleaning. And then there was a lot of guys that didn't agree with the peace treaty. They felt like, you know what, I didn't sign up for this, man. What are we doing? What about all the brothers that have spilled blood in the past? I think the violence is worse. When they let these guys out of the SHU program, all these leaders, guys that are from the 70s, from the 80s, when I came to prison, they're starting to bring the old school back, where they're not just poking people and slicing people up no more. You see all the murders that are happening out there. The Mexican Mafia, the NF, they're behind it. They would rather eat their own right now. In 2004, I was arrested in a multi-agency investigation where I was the leader of a street crew, an NF regiment. So I was the main target in that investigation. On the first day, on June 11th, 2004, they raided around 8 houses that were all in relation to this investigation. They put me in an observation cell because they said I had too much influence with the norteños. So they wanted to keep me isolated. And during that time, my whole concern was, my girl, she had lupus. I was trying to do everything I could to make it easy on her. I knew I was in trouble, but I didn't want to tell her because she had lupus, and for somebody like that, stress is a killer. So during the first couple weeks, talking to her, my mom on the phone, I had some difficult conversations with them. What are you gonna do? You're gonna sacrifice yourself, think about your family for once. My mom kept pushing me to cooperate. She kept pushing me to cooperate. You need to cooperate, do what you do. Your wife's out here dying, what are you gonna do? And I basically started pacifying her, telling her whatever I needed to tell her. Let the case play out. I haven't even been to court yet. So what they do is, and understandably, they release my phone calls of how I've been talking to my girl. And all my co-defendants hear these conversations, about cooperating. Trying to explain that to the NF, it was gonna fall on deaf ears. Because of who I was a leader. I get held to different standards because I know better. And I got no business talking like that. This is 5 years later now. People are still speculating that I'm cooperating. Come on, man, it's 5 years and there's no police reports, there's nothing. So somebody that had an agenda pushed the issue with leadership up in the Bay. They put a green light on me. Nothing happened. It was literally the dude that tried to, honoring the green light, tried to push a phone over in front of me on the tier. I still held my mud. I still wanted to be a part of the organization. 17 months later, they put me back on the active tier. I functioned for another 2 years, put another green light on me. And the second time it was just as bad as the first time. Somebody wanted to act like they were trying to spear me through the bars. The spear was like 2 feet too short, didn't have a tip on it. You know, my wife, she died. She ended up dying. My mom ended up dying. She passed away. So they did this at a time when I was already in a dark place. You know what I mean? I'm looking at life. I was getting ready to plead out. But then they pulled that. So I was like, you know what? I'm done, man. I agreed that I was done and that, that I would talk to him. So that's what I did from that point on. I denounced my membership and, I agreed to cooperate. However, the cooperation that I gave was just, I didn't go in as a percipient witness. Everybody that I got arrested with was gone. So I went in there basically talking about what I'm talking about now, how gangs work. The judge struck 2 of my strike priors, which took me out of the 3 strikes and gave me 16 years, 8 months. I've been in the county jail almost 10 years. None of that had to happen. If the NF would have let me fight my case, I would have been a big dummy sitting in Pelican Bay right now with a life sentence. Yeah, I was one of the true believers. But, by them pulling the trigger twice, I felt betrayed. For somebody that just doesn't want to be part of the organization no more, for them to walk away, to just ride off into the sunset and go on about their life and not hurt nobody, it's still not considered honorable, but it's something that people will say, you know what, at least he didn't tell on everybody. At least he didn't hurt nobody. But, there's never a retirement. You'll never be able to walk away in good standings. I've had a couple of situations where I ran into some individuals, when there are 15 of them, that's when everybody wants to get active. But, when I catch cats by themselves, they're not trying to do all that, And I'm not trying to look for trouble either, I'm trying to just live out the rest of my days without all the drama. I'm not gonna spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. My book is, I've met, through talking to at-risk youth, I've talked to kids that have gotten in trouble. Probation officers come up and tell me that, these youngsters, they read your book and we actually use your book as like a workshop type of thing. The name of the book is called Nuestra Familia, A Broken Paradigm. And so I started doing a YouTube channel, Paradigm Media News. I got a series on my channel. One's called Inner Demons, and the other one's called War Stories. It's also therapeutical to talk about it, to try to help some of these youngsters that might be headed for that type of lifestyle. I give them the fine print that they don't hear about until it's too late, until they make a commitment and they find themselves in that situation. I've seen a lot of my homeboys die throughout the years. Most of them are gone. There's only 3 roads you're gonna travel in this lifestyle. You're either gonna spend the rest of your life in prison, you're gonna die trying to push the organization's advancement forward, or you're gonna turn your back. There's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
My name is Vidal Guzman. I was on Rikers when I was 16, and this is how crime works. The nicknames that it has: the Bridge of Pain, Gladiator School, Torture Island, the name speaks for itself. 85% of people who are on Rikers Island are just awaiting trial. That means that majority of people there are still waiting to be sentenced or maybe even get released. I work for the Close Rikers campaign. We heard of stories, people waiting to be seen for 10 years. When I got locked up for a robbery. I got picked up one morning, it was like 5 a.m. And my family didn't know their rights. They put the cuffs on you, they put you on the bus, and all you see is like this bridge, and you're like, where are we going? Like, we're going to Rikers, we're going to gladiator school. C-74 is on the island itself. It's a facility that kept the 19 to 24, that age bracket. Everybody was facing hard time. 3 years, 4 years. When we was supposed to be thinking about prom or, like thinking about picking out our suits, or picking out what colleges we're gonna go to, that wasn't it. I never knew that, when I got incarcerated, that Rikers Island existed for 16-year-olds. At that time, in 2007, there was so many youth. There was overpopulated with youth. I had to go in there and be the most violent so I can be able to survive. And I learned that my first day when a youth put a spoon in my oatmeal in the morning, and what the kids told me was like, you were supposed to swing at him. And I was like, yeah? It's like, yeah, man, you don't let nobody disrespect you. Next time I said, you know what, let me corner him and tell him how I feel. If we feel some type of way, we do what we have to do. And I started slowly learning that if I want to live and survive here, then I really got to lose a piece of myself that I try to hold on, right? The human side of myself. I started learning about the program. We always knew what correctional officers were the one that was upkeeping the program. They could say, well, we couldn't put our hands on the youth, so we needed to figure out how to keep them under control. Basically, it's this like power structure on Rikers Island that had people that fight for these positions to be good, to not worry about somebody taking their stuff, but not worry about somebody attacking them. He'll get more calls to call his family, right? Because he'll take calls from people. If you're not in that power rank, that means you're not having cereal, or you're not even having a muffin. Their commissaries get taken away, their sneakers get taken away, so I had to come in these areas and be the most violent, right? Grab a TV, try to throw it at people, attack someone first, right? Like, get jumped first. Some fights I lost, some fights I won. But number one thing I always learned in jail and prison, as long as you never turn down that fight, you good. Even when I was 16, like, the fight club was real, right? Like, if you want to get in the team, you want the housing complex, you have to fight them. So sometimes the CO might fall asleep and not pay attention. Yo, the CO's sleeping. Yo, go ahead, go fight. You go right in the back of the dorm, and people fight it out. It been stuff like that. And in Rikers Island, like, when I was in C-74, there was always this little corner from where the cameras at one time wasn't able to see. Things like that happen now, right? Like, there's still fight night on Rikers, right? They know that this correctional officer might turn a blind eye, or they might not even do anything at all. I mean, Rikers is falling apart, so it's easy to make a weapon out of anything. Breaking a piece of the heater, even razors, right? Like, a lot of times people get razors to shave, and that means somebody got that razor. Weapons are usually never really brung in. They're usually made inside the facilities. Correctional officers, they knew when 16, 17-year-olds, they couldn't put their hands on them. So this fight club was the way for them to, in some way, uphold power, right? Like, I would have black eyes and correctional officers won't even say anything. They'll say, okay, you okay? Did you win? Did you swing? Did you duck? It's like, make fun of you. Like, we knew what correctional officer was blood, was Crip. We knew what housing complex they favor the most. We knew all that. When people don't got nothing to provide, like, the struggle get hard. Tattoos does happen in there. It's dangerous, but people gotta hustle. That's the black market. Selling cigarettes, selling T-shirts. People figure out their way. I remember one time somebody even started a business of selling shebangs. There's like these chips on Rikers Island that was like super good. This person was buying these chips, created an online account, and sold them for like $3 more because nobody could buy these chips, but everybody loved these shebang chips. You use the money from whoever sent you, or if you're like working for 12 cents, 16 cents, you use whatever you can to go to commissary. People start tapping into some of the skills that they probably never used outside and use inside, right? Like I remember I used to write at the time when with my loved one at the time, I'll have them design the envelope to look cool, right? Like have some like Mickey Mouse or something like that, or something like really like cartoony, and I'll pay somebody like 2 suits or 3 suits to do it. But then you have individuals who go more deep into the, the underground or the black market. From there, trying to bring drugs in, right? They're boofing. Basically, boofing means like you're literally throwing the whole drugs and yeah. So there's always like stories of even correctional officers bringing stuff in, right? Like even when Rikers was closed to visitors, how was weapons and drugs still getting in there, right? I remember when that, we will call it the red alarm, right? You will hear it all the time because of the youth. Basically, that means the turtles. The turtles are correctional officers with extra gears. Their job is to de-escalate. But that never happens. Every time I have dealt with the turtles, have been them just getting a stick and start hitting anyone. Majority of the correctional officers on Rikers was black and brown. So like I was really expecting a lot of them to understand our struggle and to also advocate for us for a better way to not be in a facility, but return back to society. Some of the things that was done on Rikers when I was younger, or even now, was done by correctional officers. Like they'll put Crips in blood houses for what? Like not every single correctional officer was like that, right? Like I had a correctional officer who was actually pretty good. His name was like right? He was a former, I think he's still a Black Panther. When he came into the space, he came with hair grease that you're not supposed to have, some comb to comb out your hair, smell good so the dorm smell good. So there were people who was trying to do the inside work. They gave too much oversee for correctional officers for Rikers Island that they haven't gave the opportunity for therapists, counselors to be in these spaces. You're hearing stories of people who are correctional officers getting mental health problems because of the issues that they had to deal with trying to survive on Rikers. And that happens, right? It's stressful. They go home, but they're locked up with us. I had to go through that same process again at 19 years old. When I was incarcerated at 19, I was there for a robbery. At that time, I was more gang-related, right? I was a member of the Bloods. I became a part of the Bloods when I was in the streets. People around me was already a part of the gang, right? Like friends, close friends of mine. So I didn't feel like I was joining, like how the Bloods, or how I wasn't joining the Bloods. I was joining my community who was Bloods, right? It's different from the West Coast and the East Coast, right? The Bloods in the East Coast grew from Rikers. At that time, early 80s, 90s, there was a lot of Latinx gangs and a lot of blacks who felt that, we needed to unite. A lot of different gangs grew there. The Treintalios, they call themselves the Patrias. I remember when they was called DDP, Dominicans Don't Play. After they changed their name, they grew from Rikers Island. There are people who turn blood or a part of a gang while they're in prison or jail. And for me, it was a lot different because I was already a part of the Bloods when I was, before I came into Rikers Island. It was so much politics. They keep the Crips in certain housing complex away from us. We don't have the same lunch. Maybe there's internal gang beef in the facility. At that time, we had too many gang members. We had the Bloods, the Latin Kings, and the Treintalios. And for me, it was like, yo, man, let's figure out how we can organize these phones so we don't get into any violence. I've been in environments where people fight off that phone. You'll go up to them and say, yo, I want your phone. Like, I want your time slot. And people will fight it out for a phone slot. Always rules that you gotta follow. Make sure you work out every day. Make sure you're intaking your lessons, right? The brotherhood of being around the Bloods. Don't mess with someone in the LGBT community. Don't be a rat. There's always those codes basically in almost every gang, right? The way that they might say certain things to say something, right? Majority of the letters that sent through Rikers Island are read. So they gotta write whatever they mean in coding. So there always been like kites, letters. Let's say they're trying to get the information to someone who might be close to them, and they'll wrap up the paper and make like a square for it to be able to slide between doors. Because I speak Spanish, I will always be able to relay messages faster because I knew Spanish, and I was able to, if I knew harm was coming, I was able to relay that fast to anyone. But like wars can happen between gangs, and it can just like change. Like a letter will go out at one time and what time needs to happen, and everybody got to move. Everybody got to move basically mean that harm has to happen. And it's a fight throughout the whole facility. I think a lot of people don't really know what is Rikers, right? Like they think Rikers is a prison, but Rikers is a collective of facilities that are not just on the island itself, but facilities that are close to the courtroom in Manhattan, Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens. I think people don't understand how old Rikers Island is. Rikers is close to 160 years that has been oppressing Black and brown communities. Richard Rikers was a part of the Kidnap Club. It was a judge who broke laws again and again by selling Black people who was not enslaved back into slavery. In the 1930s, it was built by incarcerated people to extend Rikers. Majority of Rikers Island is built on trash. When it rains, it rains in the facility. You smell this like eggy, disgusting smell all the time. You can't drink the water there. You're fighting rats and roaches all the time. I never seen collective of detainees get together to get a mouse out of the cell housing complex. We heard of people dying, get heat strokes, because of how Rikers Island doesn't have air conditions. I remember like a lot of times they'll turn a fan on, a regular fan, and let it blow all the way down the chair. And everybody, all of us would be like in our cells on the ground, no shirts, in our boxers to at least feel the coldness of the floor so we can at least cool down. And you're in a cell where you're like, I can't drink this water. I got to keep throwing water in my face. There's dormitories and cell areas. So in the cell area, it would just be me. So cells only have one individuals. There is differed from different jails or prisons. On Rikers Island, you had at least like 20 people, like, one per cell. In dormitory, it'll be like 50 people. And dormitory would be a little bit scary because the bed will be in an arm's length of how close they was. If you want to wake up somebody, you can just reach out your hand and just like tap them. When it talks about being in crowded spaces, the dormitory was one of the most horrible places to be at. The population in 2020 was at 4,000. Now, today is at 6,000. Majority of those times when you see a collective of detainees together is when they're probably going to court or when they're on the visiting floor or maybe for, medical. When I was doing my second bid, when I was 19, I actually came back to Rikers to try to get my cases to run collectively, they was running wild. 3.5 years for the case, the robbery, and then 1.5 years for violating probation. At that time, my brother was a member of the Trinitarios. And at that time, when I went back into Rikers, there was this beef between the Bloods and the Trinitarios. And I found out he was in a different dormitory, but I found out that there was, as they say, money on my brother's head to harm him from the Bloods. And I found out they was having a meeting at a lower library, and I was like, let me go in there and tell them that's not gonna happen. When I sat down, I said, that is my blood brother they are talking about trying to put hands on. They was mad because he didn't want to give some tobacco to the Bloods. That was the moment where I was like, I felt that the change came, right? That gangs are, sometimes they put family against family. And I was like, nope, nobody better not touch him. And if it does get in a situation, it should be a one-on-one. One day, I woke up the next morning, I was like in the dormitory, my brother was in the same dorm as me. It was so sad. Not because I was happy to see my brother. It was sad because my mom's had both of her sons in prison. One doing 16, the other one, trying to finish their 5 years. It was that moment in my life where I was just kind of looked and I was like, yo, it gotta be a different life for me. That meant that I decided to drop being blood. Advocates from the city are just tired of hearing stories of how much Rikers has slowly been killing our people spiritually, mentally, and physically. And it hasn't changed. The only thing that changed is that the youth are not on Rikers. Rikers has become more violent. I turn on the TV like everyone else and I hear about somebody losing their life on Rikers. I tear up just like them. I tear up for their family because I know that, I could have been one of them. A lot of people who are going to Rikers Island are individuals who have mental health problems, who are poor, can be able to pay their bail, and are individuals who are coming from communities that are poor, over-incarcerated, and over-policed. When you say you survive Rikers, that's a real thing, right? Because even now, since 2020, close to 30-something deaths. I mean, it's gonna keep going up. In 2020, some of the legislation was introduced and passed was something called the Khalif Law. Khalif Browder was one of the most knowledgeable individuals who experienced Rikers as a youth and started speaking about it. I just got lost with Khalif Browder because I think a lot of times when we think about Khalif Browder and everything that he kind of went through, getting abused by correctional officers, and that one hit us the most. The Khalif Law really got the population from where it was 20,000 to the 4,000. But a lot of that right now that has been growing is because of broken window policing, right? I think because of the Khalif Law, when we went up to Albany, passing speedy trial, discovery law, and bail reform. The bail reform issue was, you had people in there, they was in there for maybe shoplifting, and their bail be $5,000. They'll keep pushing his court date back, and they'll use the method of keeping you incarcerated on Rikers until you give up and cop out, right? Or take whatever they're trying to give you. And that's a tactic that also gets used. What we're also seeing is the population is growing because resources are declining. The resources that were needed to fully provide Rikers Island to the next chapter of closing was not happening. I think what set me to the path on Rikers is poverty. When people don't understand how poverty impacts you, when I was very young, me and my mom, we was homeless. I think for me, I get traumatized knowing that, right? And experiencing that with my moms. And then, growing up seeing people around you being in the street. 8 or 9 years old, I was already out in the neighborhood trying to figure stuff out. And 14, 15 years old, started getting harassed by police. Even being so young, walking down the street from middle school, from elementary, imagine you getting thrown on a wall by this big police officer who's like 6'3", 200 pounds, and you're just a kid. My brother was incarcerated. He was incarcerated for 16 years. And my uncle was incarcerated for around 7.5 years. But it's not just them. Most of my family been locked up all the time. And I grew up to be a man too early. Being tried as an adult meant that the judge doesn't see me as a youth. That it doesn't matter if I was 16, 120 pounds, that he sees me as someone who's a grown man. I think I regret just the violence, right? It's hard, right? Because you leave these spaces, you still got to look yourself in the mirror. I'm 32. I've been in the system for 14 years. What I mean in the system, that means in jail, prison, under some type of parole, probation, supervision. And, I'm 32, so this past 2 years been my first 2 years to being free. It feels really good. Not reporting to anyone or, being able to know I'm done, In 2015, when I came home, I worked for Drive Change, basically a food truck that it hired formerly incarcerated youth. They got involved in a lot of social justice work, right? They help people out to also figure out what do they want to do further in their life. And for them, they noticed that I was always a good speaker. You need to get involved with campaigns. So the campaign is called the Campaign to Close Rikers. They're led by an organization called Freedom Agenda. And their goal was basically to keep continuing the organizing until it finally closes. The city has closed some facilities on Rikers and facilities that are part of Rikers, like the Brooklyn facility, C-74. I can't wait till 2027 because I'll be right there, right next to the bridge trying to collect a brick.
My name is Manuel Medrano, AKA Cricket. I was a member of the Arizona Mexican Mafia, and this is how crime works. For the most part, if you look at the victims of the Mexican Mafia, they're gonna be other members of the Mexican Mafia. Looking back, it's ridiculous. No matter what, you're always gonna find some kind of villain amongst yourself. It's just the hypocrisy of being a part of this organization. When I was 17, I was transferred to adult court. I had been in a lot of trouble already as a juvenile. So they transferred me to adult court in 1995. Going to prison originally, they gave me 6.5 years. My original crime, I was charged with an armed robbery. It was a carjacking. I just wanted to be part of the cool crowd, and that's what it was. The members of the Mexican Mafia were somebody that we had all heard of throughout our time. As juveniles, as kids, we looked up to these guys. So when I got there, my crime was dangerous enough to where I ended up on a higher level yard. And so I just jumped head on into, obligating myself to the organization. And like any other youngster, they used me to do multiple things. Stabbings, moving drugs. I was in a gang as a kid. I was from a neighborhood in the west side of Phoenix. You heard about these Mexican Mafia members that ran stuff. You heard about the homicides they committed in prison. Everything sounded so glamorous the way they put it. And that movie, American Me, had come out. And that really had a huge influence on us. After the movie came out, everybody was running around with their shirts buttoned all the way to the top. To become a member, it's not necessarily a myth that you have to kill somebody. However, there's a lot of favoritism. There's a lot of nepotism. So there's a lot of people that get accepted and get made without the actual homicide having been done. But it's a expectation that they will kill for the organization when the time comes. At the time, I think the count was 150 members total. We like to think about it as, we're the elite of the prisoner system. Originally, when I was made, I had not killed anybody yet. My high-ranking member took a liking to me, and so he pushed my, well, there was a couple of them, but they pushed my name through, and I was voted on, and I became a member. Within a few months, I did kill another member in bad standing, and that solidified it. I think it took me a while to get to that point, and I think there's a way to stop it before it goes that far. I regret it all. The patch itself in Arizona, the tattoo that they wear, it's a sun with the double M that comes down into double swords at the bottom. It has a saber-toothed skull above the two M's in the middle, and then a black rose in between the double M's. Only people that have killed a member in bad standing or a member in the old Mexican Mafia can even put that black rose in the middle of the patch. There is no motto per se. Everybody speaks about this cause that we have. It's a recruitment tool. They talk about cultural aspects of it, the Aztec, the Mayans, try to put that kind of spin on it and just make you be prideful in your race. I used to tell younger people about the cause that we were fighting for, and if they were to ask me to define it, I wouldn't be able to. In the end, it's just about drugs and money and, power. That's all it is. The main rules, they have the no snitching, no homosexuality. At one time, no drugs. You were not allowed to partake in any kind of drugs. That changed later. A lot of these rules are broken multiple times. If you see a member in bad standing or a member of the old at any time, if the doors were to pop, you have to try to kill them. When you're in this SHU program, a lot of the times the guards will make a mistake and open the doors on accident. And so you always have to be ready for that. You're up all day waiting for that, basically. You're always supposed to be ready for war, and the money situation, everything has to go up as it comes in. The rule is that you spread it amongst the brothers, those that are within your ranking system. As a normal carnal without rank, you're just considered a brother. Then there'll be the ranking system. You have a captain, a lieutenant, a sergeant. You have a lieutenant that has 3 sergeants. Then the 3 sergeants each have 5 or 6 carnales under them. The money will go up through that pyramid. That's where a lot of the problems obviously come in, because people feel that money is always being held back, and so that rule will be broken quite often. The biggest rule is to always maintain contact. One of the reasons a lot of members have been killed is because when they get out of prison, they kind of just forget about everything. They stop contact. They just move on with their lives. A lot of the times the problem is they don't change their lives, so they continue with crime, and they'll get locked back up, go in there and try to give excuses as to why they couldn't write, or whatever their little, whatever the excuses are. And for the most part, it never works. And so a lot of members have been killed behind that rule alone. It started in California in the early 50s, 57, I believe. But the Arizona faction started in the early 70s by 3 juveniles, actually, that came into the system, and they started La Familia, and then shortly thereafter took on the name Mexican Mafia. Arizona had some influence from California, but was also autonomous, and now they are basically It's not together necessarily, but friendly and on working terms. The administration was originally the ones that named them old and new, but they were all the same thing at one point. These are members that just split into two factions. It was just an internal struggle, if you will. The organizations themselves kind of used it as a way, I guess, just to keep it straight as well. They would say, in Spanish, we're from the nueva, the new. They're from the vieja, the old. I never got rank. I wasn't a sergeant, lieutenant, none of that stuff. I was just a member. The 5 captains were the main ones that everyone knew. And those 5 captains sat at the, we call it the mesa, the table. We have the mesa system or table system where everything is voted on through them. So you had to be a captain with a black rose to sit at the table. The 5 captains set all the rules, the regulations, they changed the rules. All the politicking would go through them. We're still all supposed to be brothers, and we're all supposed to be equal. Even, it's in name only. That is the way it's supposed to be. Obviously, the captains have a lot more power, but again, it's more of a popularity contest. If you're a brother, you basically are expected to know what it is you're supposed to be doing, whether that's establishing stores on the yards, getting rid of people that shouldn't be on the yard, bringing in dope or collecting dope on the yards. In Arizona, our main rival, as I was coming in as a youngster, was with the old Mexican Mafia. The administration tried their best to keep them protected. They have a thing where it was called protective segregation. In the later years of the 90s, we started having problems with a group that started calling themselves the Border Brothers. That became a real big thing, and California at this point was behind the Border Brothers as well. So we were actually in a war for quite a few years against Mexican nationals or Border Brothers and California, people that were born in California. The Mexican Mafia wanted to be the only organization that had a patch as far as on the Hispanic side, the Mexican side. The Border Brothers started wearing a patch. They started being hit throughout the system, and there started being riots. It was probably about a 3 or 4 year time frame where it was going on. In Arizona, they also have an Aryan Brotherhood that it was faction off of the California Aryan Brotherhood. It was actually a California member that came into our system. The Arizona guys kind of home grew it after that. We did align with them only because of obviously the offense to the black gangs. It was just a loose allegiance. I mean, or alignment, more of just friends. If there was something that the whites did wrong, we could go to them and they would take care of it themselves, and vice versa. Obviously, if they bring in drugs, they don't have to give a portion to the Mexican Mafia, and vice versa. Everything stays within your own race, and when it comes to that. The blacks had multiple gangs. They had the Mau Mau's, Crip gang, they had the Muslims. All of them were kind of against each other, and the Aryan Brotherhood was against all of them. I was part of a riot on the Santa Rita Yard in Tucson, and I got stabbed in my neck. And I spoke to my mom, and my mom was born in Mexico. And when I told her what was happening, she was like, you guys are ridiculous. Like, what are you talking about? It's your same people. And I would tell her, no, it's different, Ma, you don't know, you don't understand. And she would just be, she would cuss me out in Spanish, just, you guys are stupid, kind of. And, now that I can look back and I can see there's no big bad wolf out there that we were fighting against. For the most part, our victims were ourselves. There's not a lot of members on the street. We don't usually make it that long because there's a whole task force that's established for the prison gang. It was called the Violent Street Gang Task Force. It was I believe 2 detectives from the Phoenix PD. They had members from the FBI, from every organization you could think of. And so those were the ones that were basically on us all the time. It was tough. They would follow me everywhere. I'd walk in restaurants and they'd be sitting and they're eating. They would go to houses of, family of loved ones, and they would tell them, hey, your son is hanging out with a real bad guy. He's suspected in multiple homicides. And they would just, try to make it as tough as possible for me out there. So when there's a member that's going to get out or something, usually they're getting out with some established things that need to be done. The problem is some of these guys will get out, and even though they left the organization, they're still into drugs or into money or whatever. So they'll go back to their neighborhoods and they'll say who they were to try to get their neighborhood to give them drugs and money. And that'll always get back to a member in good standing. And so that's how we usually find them to be able to kill them. And me getting out, I did have a few names that I needed to, that were on the list to be killed. Upon being released, I right away tried to make connections with drug dealers that were already established on the streets. At first, I tried to use being a Mexican Mafia member to influence them, but that actually scared a lot of them away. People, there's a history of bullying amongst the Mexican Mafia where they would approach these drug dealers with, hey, we're the Mexican Mafia and, we want this and that, and they just take instead of, there's no give back. So what I started doing really was I had conversations with the guys, and I was like, listen, I understand our history. That's not what I'm about. The only thing I'm asking you to do is give me a better number than you give most people. At the time, methamphetamine was a big thing, and that's what I was mostly involved in. Pounds of methamphetamine I was sending to Kentucky, where it was double the price from Arizona. It wasn't like I had to send 80% of my proceeds to anybody. The established amount for non-members is they do have to give up a third of anything they bring into the system. So if you bring in 3 grams of heroin, one of those is going to the Mexican Mafia. But us, within ourselves, we're pretty free to make money and do whatever we need to do for that. It just comes down to that rule of staying in contact. So if you get a letter saying, hey, my sister needs, a TV, then you get the sister a TV, and you're basically keeping people happy. Everything that came into prison was what was controlled by the Mexican Mafia. You couldn't bring dope in and make money without giving them their third. Now, with the connections to California and the cartels and stuff, things are a little bit more organized and established with the drug trade, and they started legitimate businesses and putting up car shops and different things like that. It depends on the members that are on the street. There was a few members in Tucson that were bringing tons and tons of dope from Mexico. They had that connection out there. I know California had a little bit more established connections with the Arellano Felix cartel at one point. It's not like saying the Mexican Mafia is working with the cartel. It's just, this member has a connection with the cartel. And if you need dope, we can get it, obviously. I mean, if you need 1,000 pounds, it'll be here. One of the big things that was happening in my day was coyoting, the Mexican nationals, bringing them over the border was a big thing. That was one of the things that was a little more organized. Usually we wouldn't do it ourselves. We're not going to take that type of risk, but you could send your soldiers that are looking up to you to go bring 10, 20 of the what they call chickens, pollos, across the border and bring the money back. And that was huge, and I believe still is. Just watching the news, you can see the stash houses that they catch were full of Mexican nationals being held. And that was the other side of it. A lot of them were sent to a stash house and they would be held there until their family paid whatever was agreed upon. And yeah, absolutely, that's still happening. People usually come into the system already with a name. A lot of us did time together in juvenile hall. And so there's always some kind of connection. His dad may be in prison, his uncle. As people are coming into the system, you kind of know from their neighborhood or their family who they are. There is no obligation to the organization. You don't have to be a part of it. The only obligation you have is if there's a riot, you have to take part in it. It's as a Chicano or a Mexican. I really only took part in sponsoring one member. I recruited, I talked to younger kids about the cause, and I did all of that stuff as well. Everybody's paperwork is read when they're coming in the system. You would read people's case. The pre-sentence report was the biggest thing that would have a lot of clues. Anybody with a sex offense, there's no way that you're gonna become a member. Other than that, there are really no guidelines. If you don't even have to be Mexican to be in the Mexican Mafia. It's just a matter of, we say, what's in their heart. I mean, if they're willing to put in the work and be a part of it, then they can work their way into being that. In Arizona, we have no color system. In California, obviously, that's their thing. They have the sureños with the blue and stuff. Arizona doesn't have that. In Spanish, La M is just the M. It's just the shortening of the Mexican Mafia calling it La M. In Arizona, we don't use the black hand as a signifier. Some of the old Mexican Mafia did, but we have our own. I had the tattoo, the Mexican Mafia tattooed on my back. In Old English, yeah, 4-inch letters, huge. The government actually paid to cover it. I mean, it was crazy. I couldn't walk around the rest of my life with Mexican Mafia tattooed on my back like that. So, yeah, they paid to have it, a tattoo artist actually come in and cover it up for me. The Arizona Mexican Mafia uses a lot of Nahuatl, which is the Aztec language. A lot of members learned that throughout their time in prison. We would use it a lot to write each other. So for the purposes so administration couldn't read our letters kind of as code. There's been other codes that we've made and come up with in there, just kind of bingo type, codes where you put letters in different spots and only the other person would know it. And every member usually has a code name in Nahuatl as well. That way we could speak of other members without, the facility knowing who we're talking about. It never works. They usually already know, but it's what we think at the time. The biggest way is through legal mail. You would get a case and print it out as thick as you can get it. In the back of one of the papers, you could write whatever needs to be sent. Now you have, 300 pages of something where one page in the middle somewhere may have a note in it. It's going to be real difficult to detect that, especially since they're not allowed to actually go through your legal mail the way they can regular mail. There's another way where it's kind of, you write with urine, and when they get it in prison, you could put fire to it and it'll come out kind of brown. The best way to send messages is just word of mouth. There's a lot of so-called secretaries, usually members' wives or girlfriends. Back then, we would have a girlfriend have 2 or 3 phones in her house, and different members would call from different facilities, and she would put the phones on speakerphone, and then we could just talk to each other that way directly. The biggest thing in prison was commissaries as good as money. Stamps was the big thing. That is the currency of prison. The NFL bets and all of that, everything was done in stamps. Dope you can buy with stamps. There was 2 ways that people could pay, or 3 actually. If you brought in cash, if you snuck cash in, cash was worth double. So if you had $100, it was worth $200. Commissary was 1 for 1. So I would give you a list the day before commissary of everything I wanted you to order for me. And, that's how you would pay me. Or you could do street to street, where your loved one would send the money to my loved one on the street. And in that case, you had 10 days for the money to be received by whoever I was receiving it. If it wasn't there within 10 days, it could double. When you're talking about the economy in prison, something that costs $20 on the street is worth, a couple hundred in prison. And so when these guards, you offer them that type of money, it's hard for them to say no. The integrity only takes them so far. Corruption is not difficult because they're human, especially when you're young and you're being offered big money and you're getting paid, $40,000 a year. And these guys are, waving, that amount of money to you for doing something that seems almost, too easy. Some of them will be relationships. The guys will get into a relationship with a woman guard, and then the woman just feels this obligation or love or need to please, and so they'll bring in anything. Sometimes they're lied to. Hey, I just need you to bring me this pair of shoes, but the pair of shoes is full of dope. They just don't know it. And sometimes they're told straight up what it is, and they're good with it. It just depends. I've seen guards open doors and let people go in and stab somebody. As far as training is concerned, that may be part of it. I've seen them as young as 20 years old, 21, they're just kids. And you're dealing with career criminals, people that have been in prison for the last 30 years. The incarceration rate in the United States, we're high up there in the world. Just putting someone in a cell for 5 years and then releasing them and expecting them to be different than they were 5 years ago that's not a plan. It's not gonna happen. If anything, I think it makes you worse. In my day, there were no programs. You can get your GED and that was basically it. Just giving people the tools to do something with their lives may even change them on the inside. If you give them a little sense of worth, when you're just sitting in there day to day feeling like you're warehoused, I think it takes some of the humanity away from you as well. You just fall in line with what's going on. And so the killing, the drugs, all this stuff just becomes normal. It's not hard to become a murderer. It's not hard to kill. And so I think the Department of Corrections would do everybody a favor if they separated everybody in that way. Younger from older, dangerous from non-dangerous, but they don't. Everybody just kind of gets mixed in. And again, I know it's difficult. It's, how many facilities can you have, and how many guards do you have to man these facilities? But in a perfect world, I think separation would be the best way. I was released in 2001 on parole, and I was out for 7 months. I went back in on just a possession of marijuana charge. I was out for 4.5 months, and I got locked back up. I was pulled over with a gun and in the car under the passenger seat. Even though I got found not guilty, the prosecution put in for the judge to violate my probation or my parole and sentenced me to 15 months in prison. I was released April of 2003. And then in May, we had the federal sting where they called the meeting at the embassy suites for all members. There was I think 13 or 14 of us on the street at the time. And we all went to this meeting where we talked about past stuff. I talked, homicides that we had done and future stuff, homicides that we were gonna do, drug deals that were on the horizon. And it was all a setup. One of the members, he was actually working for the feds. They had video cameras, audio, everything set up. And And so 11 days after being released, I was rearrested. And I went back to prison, and I thought I was gonna get out from there. I didn't know, obviously, yet about the sting. I thought I was just arrested on my violation of parole. My son's mom, based on the fact that she had been arrested in our case, she had been indicted, a few members felt that she would be the weak link. So they had green-lighted her and they were gonna kill her. But no one spoke to me about it, and everybody, we were all there together. The people that made this decision, one of them lived right next door to me at the time. And so when the feds came and talked to me about it and showed me the proof of what, this conspiracy to kill her was about, and it wasn't necessarily that I didn't believe them, because I saw the proof. So when I got back to the pod, I brought it to their attention. I was first told that, the organization comes first. It's how, all this type of stuff. And I agreed, I knew that. However, I felt that I should have been at least included in the vote, this is my son's mom. She just had my son, little baby. They agreed and apologized and said it wasn't gonna happen, but that I needed to talk to her and ensure that she wasn't gonna speak out. But that was the issue. I had told her that she could tell on me. Go ahead and tell them whatever you need to tell them to get your case dismissed, plea bargain, whatever you gotta do. A couple weeks later, the feds came back with more info. They had a taped phone conversation where it was being sent out. And so immediately, the day the feds came with the information about the phone call is when I told them, hey, go pick her up, put her somewhere safe, and we'll start talking. They put her on the phone with me, and they had her checked into a hotel. And with my son, I still remember, she was like, so you're gonna flip? She goes, what the is wrong with you? And I was like, what do you want me to do? They're gonna kill you. What do you want me to do? I can't just leave you at the house. And that was the end. That was the beginning of the end, I guess. They sent me to the CCA, and then I was there in the hole or segregation for about, I think, 4 or 5 more years. Was the end of my criminal career, I guess you would call it. I think that was the hardest time. I was, at the same time, I was on lockdown 23 hours a day. And in fact, they had enhanced security measures on me because I had went to that CCA. And so the marshals had put all these extra security measures on me where I had to be housed alone, rec alone, shower alone. A lieutenant or above had to be there to take me out of my cell. But I still thought that I was gonna get, life. I never in my wildest dreams thought that I was ever gonna get out. I was in until 2015, and now I've been out about 9 years. This other side that I'm doing now with, speaking out against it, I think I owe it. There's a lot of kids that look up to this, that think that this is something that is honorable, and it's just not. Me and my son's mom started the nonprofit phase 2 of life. Our target is the at-risk youth and trying to keep these kids, at the very least, away from these prison gangs, but if we can, away from prison in general. This is just about going into juvenile facilities, schools, talking to these kids. We've done fundraisers where we do back-to-school backpacks. We've given PE equipment to schools. We're just trying to do little things in the community, but in the long run, our hope is to, for this nonprofit to have its own facility where we can offer these kids some kind of trade, some sense of self-worth, and have us there as adult guidance for these guys. A lot of these kids don't have that. I've talked to lots of people now. I've made contacts through, the YouTube channel, crazy as it sounds. I have a couple members reaching out to me that are still active and telling me things that are going on within the organization now. And I think it's a good way to know, the happenings of today. They're no different than before. It's the same drama, the same stuff.
Hi, my name's Peter Tritton, aka Posh Pete. I smuggled $5 million worth of cocaine internationally, and this is how crime works. I was arrested in Ecuador. I got transferred into the men's prison, which was called Garcia Moreno. There was a wing which was mainly for foreigners. You could get anything you wanted in there. It was almost like a small town. Contained within walls. The security was very lax. All the guards were, well, not all the guards, but there were a lot of guards were very corrupt. So you had cash in there. You could buy a cell for about $2,000. I mean, there were firearms in there, machetes. Everybody had a machete. And when things got bad, they got bad really quick. Hence the fact that a lot of us were armed with handguns. So, after 2 years of being in Quito, I can see that my case is sort of meandering on, not really going anywhere. And my girlfriend's been released by this point, long gone back to Britain. So I'm just left out there on my own, basically, thinking of all these different ways of trying to escape. So I've become friends with some Colombians. They talked about blowing the wall of the exercise yard with an RPG because they were FARC, members of FARC. So that was one plan. Another plan was a helicopter lift off the roof of the prison, but it was a little bit too expensive, like 80 grand, 100 grand, something like that. Third was a tunnel. And because the prison was so old and so many people had escaped out there using tunnels, they said it was literally like a rabbit warren underneath this prison. They said if you open up a hole and start digging a tunnel, you will come across at least 2 or 3 other tunnels in there. Like I say, formed friends with these Colombians, FARC, members of FARC, and decided to try and escape because we can see that the case is just going on and on and on. And, they've had enough of being in prison as well. So we buy the penultimate cell on B wing on the ground floor on the right, which was virtually next door to the exterior wall to the prison. I mean, the exterior wall was a joke to that prison. It was like maybe 1, maximum 2 concrete blocks thick, and that was it. You were free. We buy the penultimate cell, stage a fake party with loud music on the wing, break the floor, so we smashed a hole in the floor, dug out the concrete, made a cap, because you could get concrete and cement and stuff in there if you wanted. So we made a cap to fit the hole and start digging this tunnel out of the prison in Quito. But the guards got wind of the fact that I was planning some sort of fuga masiva, as they call it in Spanish, massive escape. And after a little while, on a visit day, they basically came and collected me with a piece of 2x4 in their hands, a piece of wood, and said, right, you're getting moved to Guayaquil, which is the big port city in the south of Ecuador, very dangerous. And I mean, this place was gigantic. I'd seen all sorts of terrible things on the news about the prison in Guayaquil. At the time, it was either the 4th or the 5th most dangerous prison in the whole of South America. The murder rate there was between 5 and 6 a week. 8,000 prisoners, split half and half between 2 gangs who were at war with each other. I end up in the end with the Cubanos. The other end were, at the time, Los Rusos. Every day, gunfights. They had spotters on inmates on the roof of the prison, on the wings, 1 on each corner of each wing. there they had control of all the telephones. You weren't allowed a mobile telephone in your possession. You had to use their mobile telephones, so you had to pay them like $1 a minute to phone abroad, or 30 cents locally, I think it was. They had like, again, a pyramid sort of organisation where there were three brothers at the top called the Los Cubanos, the Cubanos. And below that, on each wing, they had a boss on each wing who collected like a tax off every inmate once a week on a Sunday of like between $5 and $10, which was paid back to the main bosses, or some of it was. And then they paid the bribes to the guards, to the director of the prison, to let them carry on doing what they were doing. Any foreigners that came into there were extorted for as much as they could get from you. They would put a gun to your head, get you in a cell room or in a room, and just say phone your family and get some money sent over to, you know, this person or that person by Western Union or MoneyGram. So a lot of families were going through a lot of hell, a lot of foreigners as well. Into this mix of these two gangs at war with each other comes a third gang called the Chronicles, who are now one of Ecuador's biggest gangs. And they end up on the wing that I'm on, about 10 to 15 of them, including Jose Luis Zambrano, who was like the head of he was the boss of the Chronicles at the time. And I actually got on quite well with this bunch, the Chronicles, because they were better educated. They were nicer people, even though they're contract killers. They were generally nicer people, just easier to get on with. At one point, they put me in charge of selling their cocaine on the wing for them. So I'm now the boss of the cocaine on that wing. As well as having a boss on each wing, they had a boss for each drug on each wing. So there was a boss of the cocaine, boss of the marijuana or weed, and a boss of the crack or polvo, which is what they smoked. You could wander from wing to wing, but they would lock you on your wing. You had to be back on your wing by 5 p.m. So they would lock you on your wing at 5 p.m. Now, with this third gang, the Chronicles coming into the prison, it destabilised the whole dynamics of the prison and, the power structure. So this gang, the Cubanos, didn't really like the fact that there was this new boys on the block sort of thing. And they started to become very powerful very quickly, the Chronicles, because they were already an up-and-coming, very powerful gang anyway. This gang, the Chronicles, they were kind of used by politicians and people to clean up other gangs and shoot opposition politician members. You know, they sort of hired guns, assassins. And at the time, Rafael Correa had just been elected. So things were getting so dangerous in the prisons anyway. He had a whole new prison estate built. There was a massive shootout one night in which I nearly got killed. 2-hour-long gun battle between the Chronicles and the Cubanos on the wing that I was on. At that time, the Sinaloa cartel was starting to make inroads into Ecuador. They were already trafficking with some of the gangs, particularly the Chronicles. Zambrano manages to get all the gangs kind of working together, working with the Sinaloa cartel. It's all going quite well. He then gets released. He's out 6 months, gets killed by a Colombian hitman, shot dead in a cafe. Fito took over, started running the gang in the prison, the Chronicles. Now, in the meantime, as well as the Sinaloa cartel, you start getting the new generation Jalisco cartel start making inroads. So there's now a power struggle between the Sinaloa and the new generation Jalisco cartel over who controls the trafficking routes out of Ecuador, particularly that port city Guayaquil. There's a lot of big mega labs producing tons and tons of cocaine along the borders of both Colombia and Ecuador, and Peru and Ecuador, and in the Amazon. And it's just huge business, but it's also led to huge instability in Ecuador and mass killings. At the tail end of last year, there was some really bad prison massacres, infighting between these gangs. I mean, just the most horrific, barbaric medieval warfare you can believe. Just absolutely horrific stuff. The Cubanos kind of got wiped out. Glad I wasn't there when it happened, because I'd probably be dead by now. So that all happened, and the authorities managed to get control of the situation again. But in the meantime, there's been a new president-elect called Daniel Noboa. Listening to his accent is educated in America, because he sounds kind of Americanized. Has declared war on the gangs in Ecuador, and has basically said that they're in a state of internal warfare. And if you remember what happened in the Philippines when Duarte just basically declared war on the drug gangs there, or drug users as well, and killed something like nearly 20,000 people, I think it was. So I think that's kind of the way Ecuador's about to go, and that's going to lead to a hell of a lot more deaths. So I was finally released in 2015 in Britain out of Wandsworth. After being captured in Ecuador, I spent 9 years and 3 months there, I think. I did 10 years, 10 days in total. So on that sentence, I'd already done about 3. Well, I did 2.5 on the previous one. So that's a great big chunk of life. If I could rewind time, I would probably not do it again. You know, if there'd been more money around when I was a kid, I wouldn't have been inclined to become involved with drugs. If I hadn't have been brought up around parents that were using drugs, I'd probably have been less inclined to become involved with drugs. You know, if the whole illegal rave scene hadn't happened. There were just so many things in my life that led me to this point. I mean, I wouldn't say I was very influential. I mean, 3 to 5 kilos of coke, so to me, is not that influential. I mean, I know underneath, when the police explained how many people were involved, you know, how many people were taking those drugs we were bringing in, that sort of made me sit back and think a bit and think, God, yeah, you know, we were influencing quite a lot of people's lives. Yeah, I don't know. Any kids thinking about getting involved, don't, because it will ruin your life. It might seem appealing at the time, and it might seem like a good idea and an easy way to generate money, but trust me, it's not an easy way to generate money. It's really difficult and it's really dangerous. So obviously I learned to paint and decorate when I was in prison at Gloucester, which was useful because it gave me a trade, and I think they should do that a lot more in prisons these days. I know they've cut a lot of those sorts of training courses, but I think a lot of people in prison in Britain today could do with more of that, and that's what I do now. I'm painting and decorating. I hand paint extremely expensive hand-fitted kitchens. So if anybody needs one repainted, you can always look me up.
My name's Leroy Smith. I spent 20 years in prison in the UK. I was a hitman and a drug dealer for the African crew. This is how crime works. Whoever's in the biggest gang in that prison at that time is more likely going to win that war. There's no guns, but they've got knives and hot oil. I did 20 and I just about managed to come through the other end, and I'm just about managing to live my life. I was in Belmarsh from 1995. I got my sentence. When walking into Belmarsh prison for the first time, I went straight into the unit. That's a prison inside the prison of Belmarsh. It feels very claustrophobic, keys knocking everywhere and clanging doors. Everything's electric and there's cameras everywhere, so you feel spied upon. I was in high security estate as one person, and I would defend my own self and do what was right for me. When I joined with the African crew, I had a team of people to think about instead of just me. The African crew got that name because most of the people in the crew were African. And I met them in Belmarsh, and we come from the same area of South London, out in the streets. There was a full-blown gang doing what they do. So drugs and firearms. They had money and resources, so it was more comfortable for me to be around them also. No recruitment initiation process. We was just mutually from the same area, and we had vested interest to be together. I've been stabbed in my neck, I've been cut before. I've been in the segregation on numerous occasions for stabbings and violent assaults on other inmates. I feel like I just did just enough to survive. And when you're scared and you want to survive, you can do a lot of stuff. And now I'm polite and civil, but I've got a confident energy inside me where I don't think you can just take my soul that easy. No one could just come and take my life. Violence in dispersal prison is totally different from violence anywhere else. It's clinical and thought out and planned. People will sit down and plan things and make sure that it works in their favor when they go to execute it. That's why most people, they make sure they wedge their door so no one can't come in the morning, and then they get up, put on their trainers, and they're up and ready when the door opens. I've seen inmates knock out staff, like 2-3 staff in one go, and another staff's grabbing onto the bars to stop himself being dragged into the cell, screaming, staff, with his life depending on it. The weapons used in prison fights, when I was in prison, were a piece of metal shaved into a spike with a wooden handle on the end, or oil, what they used to sell to cook food. So you got people what ain't got money, and they might make knives and sell it to other people. So you know you can go to that person and get a knife and pay them for it. Or you might have like 2 or 3 knives between 5 people, and everybody knows where it is to go and get it. CCTV is just on the landing. It's not in your cell. So anything in your cell, in the showers, is private. The searches are random, and DST, dedicated search team, come and they've got dogs and they sniff around and look around for things. But it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. You can have one person who will keep it on their person while someone else is getting searched. So everyone's working with each other for a common goal of keeping weapons in their possession. People have been kidnapped inside prisons and inside dispersal, but it's mostly like 2 people want to go to the block or want something from the governors and they ain't getting it, and then they'll keep him in the cell. Or someone's got a parcel and they ain't got no gang around them or no power, and rob them and then gone to the seg after. That's the way it would happen. I spent 20 years in prison because I was a career criminal and a gunman and a drug dealer, and this culminated in me shooting 2 police in South London, in Brixton, and I got 25 years for shooting one of the police officers, 18 for the other, 14 years for armed robbery on a jeweller's, 5 years for unlawful shooting, and 2 years for escaping from prison. I was on remand in Leicester prison, and I escaped from the prison when I was on escort to Brixton, so I became wanted. And then I went to Jamaica, started importing drugs, and I came back home and was on my way to collect some money from someone in Brixton and got stopped by police. I had a firearm on me and drugs, so I tried to make good my escape, and in the process, the 2 police officers got shot. I was just determined I weren't going to prison, and I just rolled the dice. It happened in a split second, and I made good my escape. I escaped from them and went to America and was eventually arrested by an FBI SWAT team a year later. Yeah, I've got lots of regrets because I wasted my life sitting in that cell, and I could have been like the rest of my brothers with my own house and a family. And now I've just got a big void because a big chunk of my life's just gone. Between Franklin, Full Sutton, Whitemore and Long Lartin, I would get moved every 18 months or so back and forth to one of the 4 prisons. Most people that go to high security prison, they are sentenced to more than 10 years and they are deemed by the government to be dangerous, meaning access to firearms, money. This small niche of people, they're all put into a tight, small situation where you will not be going anywhere apart from these 4 prisons. So it is easy for a gang member in one prison to make a hit on another person in another prison because everybody knows each other after 5 years of being inside that system. When I was in prison, I never had money. My family abandoned me and everything what could go wrong went wrong. I became a hitman in prison because of financial situation. There'll be times when people in there have got enemies and they don't want to confront them themselves. If someone said to me, here's 5 grand, stab this person, if it was something I thought I could do and get away with, I would do it. But what I could do is I could take the money and subcontract that hit through someone else who's even more unscrupulous than me, who doesn't care about just doing it and going to the block and sitting in the block for drugs or whatever they want. But some of these hits go wrong because I've seen people with my own eyes put a hit on someone and the hitman, after he does the hit, he turns around and tells the person he done the hit on who paid him to do the hit. And then they reverse it now, put a hit on that person. So it can go wrong because it's a cage and you're not getting out. Contraband kept the prison running, kept people high or stoned, and makes the time fly, and it generates money for people and power and influence. Chris Grayling is an MP in the United Kingdom who decided to take away tobacco and books from prisoners in the prison system. This has had a detrimental effect on the prison system and has now made tobacco an illicit substance of great value. So a packet of tobacco, which was worth £12 in the canteen, is now worth £1,000 to an inmate who has it in his possession. Now it's spice. This is a chemical, a drug. It's supposed to make you high. They spray it on paper and they smoke it. When I was in prison, it was cannabis and heroin and alcohol was the main intoxicants. All of them prisons, I've got spice in there, destroying the prisoners right now as we speak. When I was in prison and I was getting drugs to sell or to smoke, I sold cannabis in my little circle, and I took cannabis and I took Class A drugs as well in prison. I've had a phone in prison. Someone bought it up for me on a visit, and I just literally had sellotape wrapped around it, and I just literally cheeked it, i.e. I'd put it in the crease of my anus and brought it back into the prison. When I got past the first sets of searches, I just took it and put it in my pocket and walked back to the wing. And then I had it for like a few months, and then I sold it and bought a Rolex because it's valuable. A phone's worth like from £1,500 to £5,000. So in each cell, it's got a vent system, but people mostly talk through that. Category B prisons, these are prisons that are mostly in the city, and the person controlling the drone, if he knows how to fly it properly, can bring it right up to the person's cell window with the contraband on a string, and then the person can just literally hook it in from the cell window, and that's it. It's hard for them to really stop it from happening because obviously a drone can be up in the air and deliver and be back down within 20 minutes. And it's circumventing all of the systems because it's going direct to the source. The government spent £100 million on stopping contraband coming in a prison. I just simply don't believe that. And I don't understand where that money went if they did spend it. And if they paid me even 10 million, I would stop it better than what they've stopped it. I made money from drug dealing, from hits. I was just making money to live and to live my life how I wanted to live it in prison. Buy clothes, buy a watch, and have food to eat every night and cook food, which is expensive. But I couldn't put a figure on it, but I made money in prison. And I've had times when people like I've gone to Belmarsh and just from covering for someone and protecting them, they've given me $5,000, literally in cash, dropped it off at someone's house, literally. In dispersal, everybody is sitting there for the next 10, 20 years. If you've got some weed, they will just get someone to send the money or drop it off at someone's house outside, and it's done because you're all living together and no one's going anywhere. The average week you might generate a few £100 at least, enough to facilitate your situation and survive without needing anybody outside to sponsor you or pay for your living, your standard of living. So in what I saw, there's no structure, i.e. you have two main people who call all shots. Like, for example, when I was with the African crew, they didn't have a leader. As an example, it was just members together doing a sentence. The African crew had 6 people in prison, but the driving force will be what they did on the street. If you're a brother and you're on religion, then you have an ultimate leverage, because that supersedes street gangs. If you're a brother, you're going to automatically have protection because everyone looks out for everyone, and it's on the back of keeping everybody safe and peace. And then on the downside, you've now picked up their baggage as well. Now, if their enemies come to prison, you're now in that trap because you've assigned yourself to being a part of that circle. If you come to prison and you're not in a gang and you're not religious, it'll be a bit hard for you. And you might be able to get by and be as quiet as a mouse, but one day something might happen somewhere along the line. It could be something very simple, like you could go in the shower and forget to have on boxer shorts, or you might go in the kitchen and lean over someone's food. And if you want to fight back now, that's how you become into politics in prison, and then it starts and never ends. Religion is nothing to do with street gangs. People come to prison and get religious because it suits them to find inner peace and to live out their sentence without problems. That is the dynamics behind it. I am a Muslim. I took Shahada in prison. My connection with brothers in the prison is just a normal connection of faith, learning surahs and Islam, and going to pray at Jummah. There is no banner called Muslim gang. I've never come across a Muslim gang in my life. And I served 20 years in UK prisons. So this thing is a myth. The African crew's main rivals were some other guys from South London. Most of them was from Jamaican background, so they're English with Jamaican parents. They had like a 10-year war together. It's all resolved now, thank God, and been put to bed, but it was very serious and people have died on both sides. There's no loyalty amongst thieves, so you're in a prison, so your allies can be whoever at any different time. So you might be in one prison with a set of people and you're cool with them people, but when you move, another set will come, it rotates and it can change, basically. The African crew was connected to Turkish people because obviously they was getting their funding from selling drugs. And when I did meet Turkish people in prison, which what society calls Turkish Mafia, they was in there for loads of heroin, but most of them have gone back to Turkey now. The IRA is an Irish Republican army, and they were in the high security estate, and they was very respected inside that system. I was in Belmarsh with some of them on remand, and then we went to Full Sutton. They've got a structure, but their structure is in Ireland, and they are taking orders. They're soldiers. They don't get involved in prison beef, but they will back principled arguments. So they will push back against the governor because their words respected. So the main rule in any gang or criminal organization is not to be an informer. There's no other real rules. People do whatever works for them. When you share your criminal record with other inmates, if you're not been known or you've not been on telly, so everybody knows who you are, then everyone can see that you're not a sex offender or some dodgy guy. Inmates who do things like this in prison will get hurt in multiple ways because no one's gonna like them. I've had like scenarios where once in Full Sutton, this guy was in there and he was in there for rape and a murder. But when it come to light, the staff took him off the wing before we could find out. And then it was in the newspaper, but he was gone. In England, most of the prisons are old Victorian prisons in the BCAT world in the cities, but the high security prisons, dispersals, are new-ish prisons, and they're sterile and of a high standard inside. Each cell's a single cell, and it's got a bed, locker, it's freshly painted. In the UK, you have Category A, which is the highest is triple Cat A, and that is when you're in the unit on your own with no open visits and the helicopter and security to take you from location to court. After that, you've got Category B. Most people that go to prison are either a B cat or under. And then you've got C cat, and then you've got D cat, which is open prisons. That's the prison system in the UK. If I could change things now, I'd get Spice out of the prison and I'd give them an opportunity for education or a job where they can get a wage, what is a real wage, so that they save some of it in their account for when they get released. Some of them are working in workshops. What the company belongs to someone outside. So that's slave labor, that's slavery. I was lucky enough to be around someone, and my partner, when I was released, she was like a lawyer and someone, a professional person, and she inspired me to write a book. So I wrote, the book took a year to write, it's called Out of the Box. And then this led to me being able to do public speaking in schools and talk to young people so they know not to waste their time going down this road of pain and misery. To be honest, I feel more guilty for the policeman what I shot because he's forgiven me. He's read my book and then reached out to me, and then we met in the train station and I got to apologize to him face to face. And then he wrote his part of the story and he added it to the book. So it's like really humbling that someone could forgive you for such a serious thing. That was an emotional situation. And I was grateful to him, and we've been communicating ever since. And that's since 2016 till now. We do talk some podcasts together. So we meet up on those occasions, and I've got his WhatsApp so we could communicate. I've learned that life's a cycle, and you was born with nothing and you're gonna leave with nothing. And if you do good deeds are more likely to come back to you. And if you do negative things are definitely gonna come back to you.
Hi, I'm a producer on How Crime Works. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe and comment below with more ideas of topics you'd like us to cover in this series.